Hello and welcome to the Eskrima podcast. My name is Jason Inay. I'm an Inay Eskrimador. If you're tuning in, we talk about Filipino martial arts. We talk about Eskrima, Kali, Arnis on this podcast in my communities app for the Inay Training Organization at inay-eskrima.com. And of course, I offer curriculum and seminars and things like that. And in the public podcast, really just talk about what's on my mind at the time, what I've taught before. So please, if you could, like, subscribe, hit that, notifications button on there here for this. And then also, consider joining us further, join on the newsletter. There'll be a link down below, and help me beat the algorithms. I've been teaching, since 1992 as an instructor. I actually was teaching before that, and I started training officially when I was 6, but apparently, according to my cousins, I was training when I was 4 because my dad would pull me aside and train and teach me stuff as a father would with his son. So this is mostly a documentation of what's going on with me now as an instructor, as a teacher, as a practitioner, and going through all the different kinds of phases and cycles of training. And currently, last night we worked on what was actually pretty interesting. We worked initially on Filipino boxing. It was a private lesson with Patrick, my protege, and really emphasizing some of the things that are unique about Filipino martial arts and empty hand fighting. Well, I wouldn't say unique, but certainly indicative of Filipino martial arts, empty hand fighting, which is limb destruction. And we're wearing protective gear for our hands and things like that, so that way we can practice, not just boxing gloves, the bad gloves, and it doesn't really matter. Like, if you're doing the proper limb destructions, it still hurts a little bit, right? And really focusing on that as far as our main skill set. The limb destructions is a main skill set against punches of all ilks and kinds, and how to do that, establishing distance and range and things like that. And that brings me to kind of what I've been thinking about lately is the commonality with different martial arts. So my foundation is Filipino martial arts. Everything that I see and do and experience is experienced through the lens of my family system, the United system of Eskrima. And that means that, when I finally got permission, because I had to ask for permission. So my father was very careful, right? As an aside, right? You don't become the student of another teacher without permission from your teacher, whoever that is, right? For a number of reasons. And initially, what I think is really, really interesting over the years, I've noticed the response that people have to that rule that my father had. And my perception now, especially having been an instructor for 30 something odd years, and also being a student for 40 something odd years, and having peers and stuff like that, is that for the most part, people have a hard time with some of those rules that their teachers might have. Whatever the reasons for the teacher might have, which might be what they suspect, but your initial reaction is like, oh, you can't tell me what to do or whatever, right? I just want to learn, whatever. There's usually an insecurity there somewhere. Something's missing, so they're seeking. There's a lack in them as a human being, not as a martial artist, because all martial arts are complete. I know that a lot of people don't believe or subscribe to that, but that's the truth. You do it long enough. It's Musashi's statement. What is it? If you seek the truth in the way and train it enough, you'll see the way in all things, right? If you don't, then it's probably your lack. That's my perception. because some of those people that are my peers who come back and they'll be like, oh yeah, this thing. I'm like, oh, you mean this thing that we do over here? Where it's just a thing. It's not like a super awesome thing. It's just, oh yeah, we can do that because it's not the important thing here because our perspective is different, right? So, my father had a rule about that. He had a rule about, if you learn from someone, you need to be careful, right? Because they'll try to rank you, and they'll use that rank as a way to manipulate you or try to coerce or obligate you, which is, normal. Especially if you didn't come from the beginning, oh, I'm just going to equalize you at this rank because you've been training so long, so boom, right? Which in one sense is like an acknowledgement of your ability, right, and your previous time, and everybody wants that acknowledgement. That makes sense, but at the same time, it could be a red flag. It could be a red flag, right? But anyways, when I finally got permission to learn another art, I was 18 at the time, I think, and I had just made Katalun Guru, junior instructor under my father, and this is in the early 90s, right? So 91, 92, somewhere around there. And then his other rule was, if I tell you to stop, you have to stop, which was fine with me, right? And I still looked at the art that I really want to practice. I wanted to do Tai Chi. Mostly because I was intrigued with its methodology. I wasn't really I knew that I wasn't going to learn parrying. I knew that I wasn't going to learn blocking or joint lock striking or joint like attacks or joint breaking or bone break. None of those things are going to be kicking. I wasn't going to learn. I might learn a different kind of kick, a different sequence. And the way that I look at that, and going back to my statement about all martial arts are complete, is that all martial arts are playing with the same 52 cards in a deck, metaphorically speaking, right? And so it really just depends on, do you want to play poker? Or are you playing Durok? It's a Russian game, right? Are you playing Jin Rummy? What are you playing, right? But it's the same 52 card deck. Now, you could say, oh, but yeah, but I like to play at this table because it's a 3-shoe deck. It's still the same cards. It's just they repeat themselves, right? We look at that from the point of view of what are the variabilities, right? And what the really expression I'm trying to make is that it's finite, right? So our expression of it and how we might utilize those 52 cards to, play one game or another, to do one thing or another, is really just a matter of perspective as much as anything else. So, the fun part here of the training and doing things that I was doing was to experience something different, to get a different perspective, and just as I thought, I didn't really learn anything different. I learned how to do the same things differently, right? And that could be useful in and of itself, but over the years I've learned that that's just a lack of perspective on my part, not the fact that I need another art. And people will argue, yeah, well, mixed martial arts proves you wrong and stuff like that. Well, maybe, but it's not as though my point of view is not coming from a vacuum. It's not as though I've never been in a scrap or two. It's not as though I haven't been in situations that very well could have led to me not being able to do this podcast today, right? So, it's an informed opinion that I have that, most arts are complete. I actually had a comment with the gentleman that I'm currently training Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu with, Professor Mark Whiteman, and he's like, really this, that, and it's really becoming this really thing. I think he was talking about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I think, obviously, probably that was his thing. He was really into that, and that's great. That conviction is important, right? You're doing this thing, and you're like, yeah, now it's really getting, real hardcore, real fighting or something like that. All fighting is real fighting, right? There's no need to say real contact combat, right? That's silly. All combat is contact, otherwise it's not, right? So, I stated the thing that I state all the time, and I think I stated it a different way, but I believe that all arts are viable within the environment that they're presented for. Not necessarily the environment that they were originally created for, or utilized in, but in the environment that they're presented for each individual student, in each individual program, from each individual instructor at each individual school. So there's a lot of context there. There's a viability there. Most people won't be able to move outside of the associations, the gestalt, that is the frame, if you will, that is presented to them by their instructor at the school that they're at, right? And that's because, it's difficult for people to move outside of the scope of presentation. And this is a very common thing that we utilize in speech and debate and other forms of contention, right? Is that we try to frame things in a controlled way to contrive a result that's in our power, right? But if you've fought it all, you realize that that's not the thing, that things don't happen according to a schedule, a rule set, or your expectations. And so your art or your system, if we're going back to talking about martial arts, has to be able to entertain that inevitability, that context, the context of more context, of out of context, right? And so when I finally got to the point where I was allowed to train in another art, I still saw it from the point of view of what we now refer to as the Inay cipher in the Inay system of Eskrima. It's this set of ideas, concepts, principles, philosophies that we use to really rotate the cube, if you will, when we're looking at the problem of martial arts and what it presents, what it offers, what it doesn't offer, where its shortcomings are, right? And through the years, I've gone through and I've done other arts, and now my father's been gone for going on 24 years now, and I started really becoming open to, well, not open, I should say. I was looking for another teacher, because it's not good for you to not have a teacher, right? Every instructor should have a relationship with their teachers. If they don't have a regular relationship with their teachers and their peers, people that were training under their teacher with them, might be a problem. So that's just an aside, right? But having a relationship with those people gives you perspective and gives you scope, and allows you to stay honest with your training, right, and yourself, right? So with me, going through the years in training, I still continued to look things through the lens, but I still needed a teacher. And so, of course, I went to my Uncle Danny, and he had said, just come to the school, go to the seminars, do the instructor training programs, all that stuff. He said something to the effect of, there's a little bit of growth there for you, right? And I found most of my growth not in the Filipino martial arts stuff, not in the Inosano Kali curriculum as much as it was. I found some growth in the Majapahit and some growth in the JKD, and and then I had a hard talking to, not really, but go train in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and I was like, meh, don't really want to. And no, you really should. You're gonna learn from Professor Machado. And then my Aunt Paula is like, we got you set up. You're going. You just get a gi, and I'm like, all right. So I go, and the reasoning I've had, and I've told many people this now, is that when it was my dad and I was looking for a teacher, teacher says, student does. That's the old way. And if your teacher has the right mindset, and it's not about control or any of those things, that's a good thing. You have a teacher to guide you. That's what the whole point of a mentor or teacher is, right? And so I go to learn all these different arts, right? So now I'm doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, doing Shuto, doing JKD, doing all the different Inosanto Filipino martial arts methodologies, doing the Majapahit Silat, which incorporates Mande Mude, Sura, Panjian Silat, Chikulong Silat, which is one of my favorites as far as fun stuff, Haramau, all of these things. And I'm still looking things through the lens of what I've already learned, which I think is a normal thing, right? As a way to dissect the experience, right? So you have an objective experience, that's what's happening, and then you have a subjective experience. If you don't know what that means, let me put it to you this way. Have you ever looked for your sunglasses on the way out to your car or just on the way out of the indoors, right? And you're looking for it and you can't find it, and then realize that they're on your head? Have you ever looked for your car keys and they're in your hand? Or something of that. If you had that experience, that's the difference between objective and subjective experience. Objectively, the thing you're looking for is right there. Subjectively, you couldn't see it. If you've been in martial arts for more than 10 or 15 years, which is approaching a long time in martial arts, if you're coming away going, I've been doing martial arts for a long time, and you're in 3 and 5 years, hold on for a while, right? But if you've been doing it for 10 or 15 years, you'll be like doing something, training something, attend a seminar, maybe your teacher is teaching a class, or even just a student or a junior student that's junior to you will do or say something, and you'll be like, it's so obvious, why didn't I see it? That's an example of objective and subjective experience, right? So I'm looking through this lens that my father helped construct for me to dissect the experience of fighting. This is the study of haploology, or the study of warriorship, the human condition under duress, etc. And I'm learning through all these things, and I come to this realization, going back to the very beginning of what we started talking about, is range. What are the commonalities? Range is always common, and it dictates everything. In fact, Jeet Kune Do as a structure is not, it's awesome, but at the same time, it's really saying, oh, look, sunglasses are on your head and your keys are in your hand, right? Like, can you see this, right? It's this obvious thing, right? Like, if I'm going to hit you, if I see an opportunity, I should hit you. That's a single direct attack, right? If I'm going to hit you, I should hit you a lot. That's an attack by combination, right? And then, if I'm going to go after hitting you, I should probably use some deception and fake you a little bit so that you don't know where to put your defense. That's called a progressive indirect attack, right? And if you put something in the way, right, then I should move that out of the way. I should prevent you from being able to use it, which is a hand immobilization attack or a foot immobilization attack, right? So we've already gone through, single direct attack, attack by combinations, the SDA, ABC, and the SAA, which is single angular attack, which is if I see an opportunity to attack, but I need to take an angle because I'm less vulnerable, or because I'll be able to access the target easier, then I use a single angular attack, right? So single attacks, attack by combination, progressive indirect attack, which is faking and deceptions and stuff like that, and then hand immobilization attack is what most people see, and then foot immobilization attack is foot trapping instead of hand trapping, right? And then there's also the other thing is like, hey, if I really want to get an opening on someone, what I should do is get them to expose themselves, so I'm going to bait them with an opening, right? And then they're going to take that opening, and then I'll be able to attack, which is called attack by draw. So you have single direct attack, attack by combination, progressive immobilization, or PIA, progressive immobilization, or progressive indirect attack, hand immobilization attack, and finally attack by draw. Right? These are not, as far as the JKD set of 5 ways of attack are concerned, these are not, this is like, if you were doing it in the first place, you'd be like, oh yeah, that's obvious. But sometimes, if you're in a frame like I discussed before, it's presented to you in a way where you just don't have the scope to really understand that there's a wider world out there. It's Plato's cave, but with kicking and punching, right? So I'm seeing this commonality of range, and how JKD has a structure for that, which is not the 5 ways of attack, but it's this other part of it where you're using your out of range, foot range, hand range, hand foot range, elbows, knees range, trapping range, grappling range, right? You're seeing this commonality, and then you're seeing like, some arts will only stay in a line or a proximity. Others will have processes to create the proximity they need to execute their main fighting method, whatever that is, right? So I'm seeing this commonality here, and I'm looking at that, and how it's perfectly encapsulated in the trend in FMA, which is a short, medium, and long range, right? And I like that better than, say, some others where you have all those, hand range and not under range and threat range and stuff like that. And you need all those things, and I teach all those things, and grappling range, and then you got kicking range, and elbow and knee range, trapping range, and all these things useful. And you need that. But at the same time, elegance is defined by creating an effect with the least amount of distinctions. That's elegance. It's simplified, right? It's Occam's razor as far as a structure of distinctions are concerned in order to create an effect, right? So, looking at this and you're looking at range and experiencing this and going, okay, so like there's this range, differentiation and everything with all these different styles. And what it did was for me, right? Go back to what my dad would say. It's like the art's complete. System's complete. It's your understanding and your incapability to see through to the truth, to see objective reality that is the problem. And he never said it, but I say it to myself now. I don't necessarily express it to my students because they have their own process. But if I need another system, another art, or another style to see the truth in my own, it's a crutch. I'm mentally weak. Right? I'm blinding myself because I'm incapable seeing past my own achievements, seeing past my own preconceived notions, right? Which brings me to the final point that I want to have for this particular podcast, right? I'm seeing this commonality in trends and all these other things, but really what it did for me more than anything else, and this range is just something I'm picking to talk about today, right? But there's range, there's a particular kind of movement, a defensive method. There's all these different common threads. And my master classes for the Inay Training Organization curriculum that I give to my global students, right? So I got students in the Middle East, I got students in Europe, students in Asia, students in the U.S. here, and we try to work on something monthly, right? So this last month has been evasion. So focused the podcast for members only and the masterclass for the month on evasion, to just prime people's minds to really look at the art from that point of view, right? So there's all these common threads everywhere within the system, and right now I'm talking about range, right? I have not had a plateau in my training since I was maybe 17 years old. 17 years old. That's 43 years ago. And most of the people that I know, they have plateaus all the time. And it's mostly because they can't see past their own successes. They can't see past their own predispositions and their prejudices, right? You need confidence in the things that you do. That's a positive thing. But that confidence breeds prejudice, right? And so you look outside yourself, outside of your organization, your system, in most cases erroneously, because you think you're missing something, or the organization or your system or whatever is missing something. And the reality is that it's usually you missing something, right? It's you, and what you're missing is the elimination of something that's unnecessary. That's almost always what it is. Over the years, like, oh, I wish my crosswalk was better. I wish my serrata was better. I wish my footwork was better. Well, there was an inclination in the way that I moved that was not necessary, that I continue to do because of a fear reflex. It was a twitch response. It was improper training. And then if you truly understand learning events, and you truly understand the way that the body and the mind process information to inculcate, or to rather, I should say, to engender, to entrain, to just teach you how to move better or do better, right? Then the transition is really quick and fast, right? If on the other hand, you're going to brute force it and you're going to be like a monkey and do it as many times as you can until you have enough repetition, that might work for you. It's actually not how learning events work, but that's usually how the average Joe schmuck teacher, sorry if that offends you, but like if you're using repetition and rote memory, then you're not a teacher, right? You might as well just be reading from a textbook, right? You're not actually teaching anything. What you're doing is creating a confined space for someone to do something so that they can teach themselves over repetition, and finally they go, oh, that's what you mean. You didn't teach them. You created an environment so that they could learn something. It's completely different, right? Anyways, so when we're doing this and we're training and we're looking at that and we start to find ourselves in a plateau, we look for the common threads to help us see the objective reality of what's really happening, right? Because otherwise, we're gonna, let's look at it from a different point of view. Let's pull back 1,000 meters, right? Let's get bird's eye view, right? My effort to learn the way that I just described, in a really crappy way probably, but is really an inelegant, brutish, Neanderthal way of describing what Musashi would say is like, you should see the way in all things, right? To master one trade is to master all the trades. To see things clearly, right? And Sun Tzu, I think, says it like, to be able to defeat one enemy is the same as defeating 10, 100, 1,000. This is a truism that most people they espouse, but what does that actually mean, right? In order for you to do all those things, to see through and to experience all things, means that you actually have to have at least a glimmer, a side-eyes glance at the world, which is objective reality, and see past your subjective reality. That's why, like, now when I teach, while I teach within the not confines, within the frame of the Inayan system of Eskrima, my family system, and I utilize the cipher that my father developed and that I continue to develop, right, that's what I utilize specifically to expose an objective reality. But that's beside the point, right? While I teach those things and I do those things, right, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to validate what people of the field did that wrote, who were truly great. I'm not talking about regurgitating information and chronicling the past, dramas and hero stories of teachers of old, right? I'm really talking about concrete, objective things, right, that are useful for us right away, right? And so now when I teach from that frame and everything, with the objective of experiencing an objective reality, right, through fighting, right, through my own process of getting past myself, so that there really isn't a fight, because there's only two fights, right? Anyways, that's a whole other philosophical question, right? Like, you're never really truly fighting your opponent, right? But anyways, is this, there's only 4 things when we're learning martial art. There are only 4 things, and this goes to the whole thing with there are only 2 fights, right? But it's this: geometry, physics, physiology, psychology. Geometry, right? It's interacting lines of force. Right? Someone strikes you, right? That if that strike is coming by foot, by stick, by axe, by hand, whatever it is, by axe kick, right? By hammer fist, whatever it is, it's traveling. It being the attack, the implement, whatever is being utilized, is traveling along a line of, right? That line is the trajectory of the attack, and there's going to be an incumbent amount of mass and therefore kinetic energy that is going along that line, and it'll be delivered at impact based upon the impact surface. So knife hand's better than hammer fist because knife hand is a smaller striking surface, right? Edge of blade is better than a foot because a blade cuts because the striking surface is smaller, right? So that's just basic geometry and physics right there, right? So as that line is coming, what can I do? Well, if I have enough mass and the proper geometry and structure, I might be able to interdict that line of force, but I'm not necessarily going to be able to block a hammer with a feather, because even if I create the right planes, and what I mean by this is a perpendicular plane to the line of attack, so that the obstruction that I create with my feather will stop the hammer, right? The feather lacks mass and the right kind of structure where I can utilize the rest of my body behind that feather to stop it. That doesn't happen. So there's some things that have to occur along the also necessary need to provide a perpendicular surface to the line of force, right? This is basic geometry and physics. Really, you don't need math for this. It's just really to understand, reminds me, my best friend tells me a story about living in Vermont, and there's a guy that fixed engines, right? Right, that was his thing. So you'd bring like, you know, lawnmower, you bring a blower, you bring, you know, your car, whatever it is. He just fixed motors, right? And he'd bring it in. You'd bring whatever it is that you need to fix it in, and he'd look at it and go, all right, be 2 weeks. And they go, oh, okay, yeah, look at it. What's wrong with it? Broke, doesn't work. Be back in 2 weeks. Right? Really simple. Simple way. It's broken, doesn't work. Right? In the same sense, when we look at things that we're doing through our martial arts from this objective point of view, and by objective I mean I've removed, when we look at just geometry, physics, physiology, psychology, I'm removing, well, my teacher this and my teacher that, right? And my art's from this country or that country, and this is my lineage, right? And my rank is this and my teacher's rank was that. And then all of those things are important. You need to preserve those things, right? That's part of your culture and your history, which is a big part of psychology, right? But they don't stop a fist. They don't help you dodge bullets, right? You don't parry swords with that stuff, right? It doesn't matter how many stripes you have on a belt, if you even wear a belt, right? Or whatever your title is or anything like that, you know. So if you feel the need to be like, no, my title is whatever, I've been corrected by people as a humanist address me by their title over the years, and I go, okay, and I just do it because it doesn't really matter to me, right? But it doesn't stop a fist, right? It just doesn't, right? So when we get to the point of irreducible, right, and we start to peel back bias and prejudice and misconceived notions, we find the objective reality. And that's what the Nine Ciphers about. Like, you know, like, there's only so many kinds of defenses. There's only so many intentions to attack. There's only so many target groups. There's only so many intentions for an attack, right? There are only 5 elements in martial arts. There are only 5 elements that make up a good fighter, etc., etc., etc. This structuring, whether real or not, whether we could refute it or whatever, whether we're being elegant with the fewest amount of distinctions or not, this process allows us to remove our bias, right? I love the Inay system of Eskrima, and I do personally think it's one of the better systems out there, right? But not because it's the Inay system of Eskrima, but because it's trying to do this one thing. It's not trying to prove that Eskrima is better, right? I used to think so when I was a kid. It's not. Eskrima isn't better than any other system or style or art, right? Neither is the Inay system of Eskrima necessarily, right? It's what it's trying to do is produce a set of experiences that allow you to create an informed set of behaviors that will help you accommodate most, if not all, forms of attack, whilst enabling you to execute most, if not all, forms of attack, right? While you see truthfully to what your opponent is trying to do in whatever form of attack and defense that they try to use, right? It has nothing to do with, you know, my dad learned from Angel Cabals, Max Sorrento, and Leo Huron, was a founding member of West Coast Eskrima Society, yada, yada, yada. I learned from my dad. He is a grandmaster. I'm a this and this. None of that matters. You know, I have a student that I've talked about in previous podcasts, Charlie. I talk about Charlie because of all my self-defense experience, my students' experience. Like Jacob over in Florida defending against a guy with a machete. Great, that's awesome. And I like that he was able to do that, right? And it was in a bar and all this other stuff, and the police came, and he's unscathed, right? Great. But I taught him when I was teaching at Stanford University. I like talking about Charlie because I started teaching Charlie when he was like 6, 7, somewhere around there. So this is someone that was, I had the privilege to teach. I had the honor of passing on what I could to him, right? So that he could defend himself. So you fast forward to the age of 18, which is not so long ago because he's like 19 or 20 now at the time of this recording. And so some homeless guy comes up and attacks him with a knife from behind, and he's able to not only defend himself, but disarm him, right? You know, and that had nothing to do with whether or not Eskrima was better. The defenses that he used, I've seen people teach in Chinese martial arts. I've seen people teach in Japanese martial arts. I'm sure it's in Indonesian martial arts. In fact, I know it is because I teach. I do teach some Chamandi from my Salat program, right? And they have a similar movement in there, right? And each of those versions is just as good as the other, depending upon context, right? The disarm in and of itself is not terribly unique. It's in other FMA systems, as should be, and should be expected, and it's also in other arts as well. It's the way that people or organizations or styles arrive at that conclusion of how to do that is different, and is either faster or slower, more or less efficient, depending upon context, right? But it's not unique. It isn't, right? However, to get someone to there, I mean, truthfully, Charlie was capable of doing that movement that he did. For those in the know, it's an F1, KDM F1, right? He was capable of doing that when he was 11, right? When that kid grew up to man size by the time he was 11, 10, he was big, right? Coordination wise, maybe not necessarily there, but the thing is that if we probably had a footage or video of that, it probably wasn't terribly smooth, right? Because of adrenaline and fear and surprise and all those things. And aesthetics set aside, pragmatism, empirical experience are much more valuable than what looks nicer and what lineage you have and title and what your rank is and all those things, right? It's that objective reality that is exposed by things like range. Range exposes that, right? You think you have this great technique, but then all of a sudden your opponent doesn't give you the range that you want, or you don't start the fight in the range that you need, or you never achieve the range and the proximity or zone that you need for the art that you've been practicing, and so then you never produce the correct behaviors to make that art work, and so therefore you think that the art doesn't work, so you go and start doing something else. It's not that the art doesn't work, it's because you suck, right? You should have had a better teacher, or you should have been a better student. I don't know how to tell it to you. I find myself being terrible at things all the time, and that's what I'm seeking, because that helps me peel back my bias, right? That helps me peel back my prejudices and allow me to experience the objective reality that I'm living in, that I'm contending in. Because never mistake, you're always fighting for something, right? I'll see you on the training floor.